As you can see by the fact that we've just started, we will be recording this today, and later on it will be available for you to use and share amongst other teachers. We'll begin with an acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various places from which we gather today, who have walked upon and cared for this land for thousands of years. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We also pay our respects to First Nations people attending today's session. We acknowledge the continued deep spiritual attachment and relationship of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to this country, and commit ourselves to the ongoing journey of reconciliation. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. My name is Michelle Franchini. I'm the editor of Australian Catholics, and very shortly Michael McVeigh, who's the head of Jesuit Communications, will be talking to Anne and Maddie about retreats. You are more than, we invite you to join in the conversation. If you've got a question, please put it in the chat box and we'll get to that as we go. If you want to be recorded as attending for professional development reasons, can you please make sure that you have both your names in full on the box so I can record those. The session is being recorded, and as I said, the video will be made available on the Australian Catholic Education Hub members in coming days. And if anyone has any concerns, please feel free to contact us. Please, I'll hand it over to Michael McVeigh. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thanks, Michelle. I was doing a presentation to a school about half an hour ago and my voice started going at the end. I've had a bit of a lozenge, but hopefully I don't end up coughing like you. Look, thanks. And thanks for everyone for joining us. I might just join Michelle in acknowledging the First Nations peoples from whose various lands we joined today's meeting, and paying my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So thank you everyone for joining us, and thanks particularly Maddie and Anne. I've been looking forward to this conversation. It's been a while since I've been involved in retreat ministry. It was sort of my young adult days where I was doing that, but it's an area that I'm really interested in. It was kind of my really formative experience for me, was leading retreats, and I think it can be a real formative experience for young people as well. And I think it's good to kind of talk about and see how we can do this in the right way that gives young people an accessible and helpful introduction to God through these retreat and formation day experiences at school. So I might just start just again by giving each of you just a quick opportunity to introduce yourselves. There was obviously the blurb for the story, but if you could give us a little bit of introduction to yourself and maybe just a little bit of an idea for you, what would you say in your experience defines a successful retreat? Maybe I'll start with you, Maddie. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what for you defines a successful retreat.
Thanks, Michael. My name is Maddie, and I'd just like to acknowledge that I'm coming from Ghana country, which is the Adelaide region, and I pay my respects to elders past and present as well. So I've had a bit of a journey in youth ministry. I think I tallied it up the other day, and I'm coming up to 9 years of working directly with young people in youth ministry, and I've sort of had a wealth of experience in working with the Maris brothers, but also the De La Salle brothers, working within Australian First Nations communities, but also working globally as well, and sort of in retreats and social justice and sort of various things too. So I guess that's the briefest of brief backgrounds and more so I don't continue droning on. But I think I'm really interested by this concept of a successful retreat, as you sort of alluded to. I think for me, one of the things that I like to do is break down and sort of deconstruct words, and successful is one of them, because I think it looks very different to each and every single person, but also each and every single community, whether it's a school community, a parish community, you're based in a religious order as well. Success is going to look different to everyone. So for me, rather than use the word a successful retreat, I think I'd like to use the word wholehearted retreat. And by that I mean giving young people an opportunity to be completely authentic in a really safe, inclusive and welcoming space where stories are heard, young people are seen, and young people have an opportunity to have a say in what they're doing too. So there's sort of that, I guess, prong of for it to be seen as wholehearted for the people that we are servicing and for the people that we journey with as well, with a very intentional use of that word with. That's how I would sort of see a successful retreat, or rather a wholehearted retreat. And I think that pays dividends for yourself as well, as a retreat facilitator or as a staff member engaged in the retreat experience as well. It comes back on you tenfold. So in a brief sort of way, I guess that's how I'll begin.
Thanks for that, Maddie. Well, how about you, Anne? Do you want to just give a quick introduction to yourself, and how would you define a wholehearted or successful retreat? Can you hear me? No? You
Sorry,
are?
I keep getting muted.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anne Slingo, and I also acknowledge I'm calling in from Wurundjeri country, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, this beautiful country, and past, present, and emerging leaders. Pay my respects. So I've got a long sort of history in Catholic education in primary and secondary. I'm primary trained, and then I've done postgraduate studies and now teaching in secondary. And so I have had the opportunity to work in many retreats over those years, including, even with the little ones, sacramental based retreats. We have a retreat program that actually runs really from foundation to year 12. So we have a sequential retreat program that runs over several years. So in my experience, I've worked with very young children through to great big boys at the age of 18, and of course with adults. So when I think of a successful retreat, I take on board what you called, Maddie, a wholehearted retreat. And for me, I think a successful retreat is an encounter with God, or good, can be seen to have come out of it. And I suppose in Ignatian terms, I'm thinking of that shift in understanding or change of heart that is just such a gift, such a grace to observe when you see it, that aha moment, I sometimes hear it called in your retreatants. So just very, we'll talk about, I'm sure we'll come back to this sort of area more, but that's for me is what I am praying for when I work with retreatants.
And you mentioned the Ignatian spirituality, and I think a lot, if not most of your background has been in Ignatian spirituality, working in Jesuit schools, Ignatian contexts. Can you talk a little bit describe, what Ignatian spirituality is, and what does an Ignatian approach to retreats look like?
Okay, so in Ignatian spirituality meets you where you are, I find. In my work in formation in Ignatian spirituality, I've found that it's very accessible. The language and what we call the way of proceeding is very accessible for most people. I've rarely met anyone who is resistant to it. So we have in Ignatian spirituality, we have Ignatius telling us to seek and find God in all things, and as lay people, I think I would call that growing the capacity to see God's action in our life, and then how do we be what we might call a contemplative in action, where we can convert this action for the good of and in service of this complex world in which we live. So in terms of planning retreats in that way, we have a paradigm which really we apply to all our work, to our teaching, to our interactions with others, which we call this way of proceeding. And it begins with context. So as a formator, what do I need to know about this group ahead of me? How can I best serve them in their retreat? And if I don't already know the group, if I'm not a teacher of them, I would meet with their teachers and we would plan collaboratively for the cohort. Context is also what the group brings to the retreat. So I like to start any retreat, no matter what the age group, with a bit of journaling about what do I bring to this retreat? I come here feeling, I come here hoping. And then in the retreat, I would try to build in an experience. So design an activity or a prayer or a reflection that will engage the retreatants in a way that, as I talked about before, might awaken the movement of God in them. And this might be tapping into a memory. It might be by use of the imagination. It might be by evoking the senses. Ignatius refers to this as tasting something interiorly. So for a Year 3 class, for instance, this might be an imaginative contemplation on scripture, say, the Good Samaritan, something that's familiar to them. And then following this experience, we give them this experience and then we just say, what happened? So what came up for you as retreatants? What did we remember? What did we imagine? What did we smell, taste, hear, see? What might be the implications of that for us? There might be a bit of journaling around that, maybe on, if we're talking about Year 3 again, how can Jesus help me be a good neighbour? So talking about the Good Samaritan story. And then there's this action component where we look for signs of what's leading us to growth, to desire to serve, or might be decision making, shifts in understanding, as I talked about before, these aha moments. And we would encourage then, back to the journaling, what might be the action that comes out of this? What do I leave here thinking? What do I leave here feeling? And of course, when they have a look at what they wrote at the beginning, there's going to be hopefully some shift in how they came into the experience and an action perhaps that they're taking out of the experience. So that's the paradigm that we apply to the planning and to the delivery of a retreat.
Thank you, Anne. And we might, unpack a little bit more later what some of the other successful, activities or successful,
Yes.
initiatives that you might do as well. So, but that's a really good introduction to that Ignatian. And if anyone has any questions about specifics to that, please again put them in the chat and we can pick up on that later. But thank you. Maddie, your experience, as you mentioned, has been in the Marist and De La Salle areas. Obviously, they've got different approaches to retreats and the way they do things. What to you has characterised the approaches to retreats in the Marist and De La Salle charism, and what are the valuable things in those approaches?
Yeah, really unique sort of approaches. But listening to Anne talk, I think the similarities that come across all the different charisms and perspectives and spiritualities is truly that relational understanding of being with people and that relationship with God too. So I would say that that's a sort of consistent thread. And then the approaches differ, again, like Anne said, depending on your context and your demographic, but also your geography as well. So for myself, something that I particularly picked up coming from the Marist world and then coming into the De La Salle world, but I was always sort of considered the covert, well, not so covert Marist in the De La Salle world, but something that I particularly picked up was the real intention on relationship with each of the communities and the intentional consideration of what's been happening within your school community, what's been happening for the year level. It was a really sort of tailored and adaptive and flexible approach to meeting people where they are and meeting the younger students where they are as well. And that worked in really profound and sort of wonderful ways, but also really allowed for a lot of agency with the students and with the young people to be able to uncover their own understanding of certain themes or contexts, or being invited into a curious space where they could have that dialogue. So that was sort of what I noticed from the De La Salle approach. That real commitment to education was at the forefront and really empowering through that education. And then in the Marist world, there's a really strong focus on consideration of people and becoming the best people that we can be in the eyes of God through that Marist lens, that Marian lens of saying yes to everything, well, not everything realistically, but when opportunities arise, the courageous and gentle yes, which can really change lives and impact the lives of many. And that real focus on going to people who are on the peripheries. But what I love about the Marist charism is that understanding of being agents of change in the world today and the leaders that the world needs and the world that God desires. But also that sort of flip of the phrase that we know of going to people on the peripheries, and instead it's not going to people on the peripheries or continuing to place people on the peripheries. It's going to where people are, which is at the center of their world, and having the grace and the humility to sit with people and uncover the world that they know and see the world through their eyes. So there's sort of two approaches, and with that similarity and that common thread, but based so heavily on the relationship with whether it be people, whether it be God, the relationship within their community as well, and that inclusive consideration as well, in that adaptable approach depending on your demographic, your geography as well. So the multicultural and the multi-faith considerations as well, the inclusive prayer, the inclusive liturgy, and the inclusive content as well in that. I think something that's quite common no matter where you're doing a retreat is treating our young people as the sort of wise and brilliant people that they are, and knowing that even though we are delivering a retreat and we're delivering content, what we learn from them and the wisdom that they will bring to the retreat is what will make it incredibly valuable.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense that's emerging from what you're talking about there. There's a few things that are emerging, but one of the things that's emerging from what you're talking about there is a sense that, in that context, a retreat is almost a collaborative experience. So it's giving space as well for the young people to bring something of themselves to it and making sure it can adapt to where they're at. Can you talk a little bit about how that happens in a retreat? Just what does it look like? How do you give us an example perhaps of a time that's happened, or an experience you had of that sort of collaboration in that retreat context?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, where I've seen that most strongly is through social action and the unpacking of social action, and the considerations that young people have that, I'm 10 years out of school now, and there are things that our young people are doing in year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9 that only now am I uncovering or learning about, which is just so incredible. Like, and a concrete sort of example is learning about worm farms in terms of social action. And that's, it's something that I never would have considered from an ecological sense, but the consideration there, or how strongly our young people are considering the environment in their consumerism, but also through thrift shopping, or their creation of things as well. It can look like different things all across Australia or wherever you are. Just the creativity in the social action, and how our young people really wear their hearts on their sleeves is something that I've learned really strongly and picked up on, and now continue to vocalize as well.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any stories of similar experience, that kind of idea of young people being able to bring something of themselves and helping shape that experience as well, and how you facilitate that in a retreat?
Yeah, I do, Mick. I have lots of lovely stories about that. This is not really in a retreat context, but even just last Friday, I accompanied some of our year 11s to a place that people live in who would be homeless if they were not there, and we play games with them. And one of the boys was sitting at a table near me playing snakes and ladders with a lady, and I could hear her asking him all these questions. Have you got a girlfriend? Is she pretty? Where did you meet her? What's her name? And anyway, I could hear, and every now and then she'd call out to me, "Anne, Harry's got a girlfriend," like all this sort of. So it was everyone was hearing this conversation. As we left and went to the car, I said, "Well, Harry, there's not much I don't know about you now, listening to your conversation with Jenny." And he said to me, "Mrs. Slingo, Jenny and I have so much in common." And I thought, wow, he'd cut through all the outer stuff. And that's what he took away from that encounter. And I was once again blown away by the beautiful nature of our boys, our children. Jenny and I have got so much in common. It was just, it was a highlight for me. I just kept going back to it all weekend thinking, you know, these kids are going to be all right out in the world, I think. It's not really a retreat story, but it's a story of, them being able to, as you say, Maddie, go to the margins, but just we would call it accompaniment. You know, they're very comfortable there.
There's a sense in that experience and in what you're describing too of and it was something kind of, it was always apparent to me, or something I was always, you know, you can't be too involved. You can't structure a retreat too much. It can't be about telling them and just presenting them with stuff. You actually have to leave space for the Holy Spirit to work, you know, for those conversations to take place, for those quieter moments to take place, for that space. To get out of the way, exactly. And I think that there's a sense in that of the need for that in a retreat space. Is we can think that we have to structure this and crowd it out, but actually a lot of the time it's really about making sure that there's the space for the Holy Spirit to work, as I call it, you know. You mentioned there, Anne, a lot of your experience has been with boys and running retreats for boys, and so I just want to break that down. And I think Maddie, I'll ask you about girls in a moment and mixed settings. But in your experience in working with boys, Anne, what are some of the things that work, and what are some of the ways that you need to kind of approach these spaces that to help boys to get the most out of retreats?
I think particularly younger boys need plenty of movement, Mick. So one thing that we've had a lot of success with is we have access to a labyrinth, which is it's a beautiful, calm place. It has wind chimes and eucalyptus. It's quiet and beautiful, and it's soothing for all the senses. It smells beautiful. It sounds beautiful. And so within a retreat, I like to build in a visit to the labyrinth. I give them a little bit of a briefing, you know, before we go, about letting go on the way into the labyrinth, and the centering and what you receive in the center, and then the renewal of purpose on the way out, or what I might let go of. So we get over there and they look at the labyrinth, and I try to sort of get them to go in gradually, but they run in and they race through the labyrinth, and they've completed in about 3 minutes. And again, this is about giving them space. I've learned to just watch them, because invariably they emerge from the labyrinth, having rushed through, and they stand there and they look at it, and then they come over to me and they say, "Is it okay if I try again?" And the second time they move much more slowly and reflectively, and they emerge very calm and still. In fact, my colleagues say, "What did you do to them over there? What is this?" They call it the miracle of the labyrinth. But without a word of a lie, I take over a gaggly bunch of, you know, maybe year 6s or 7s, and I bring back this long line of kids who are just in another space. So I think that is something that works for boys, is movement. Older boys welcome the silence. The feedback that they give is that they're often tired all the time, you know, these big boys, and they sit down in their chairs and they fall asleep. So I've taught them to how to sit so they won't fall asleep. Don't cross your legs and sit up straight, put your feet flat on the floor, all that sort of stuff. But they do really love silence, and I would always try and build that into a retreat for older boys.
Thanks, Anne. Maddie, not to put you on the spot, in terms of but working with girls and or in mixed settings, what are some of the things that you've experienced, and what are some of the things that work for you that work with girls in retreats?
Yeah, I think particularly in settings that are all girls, and this is sort of in a range of ages as well that I can think of, but the power in conversation and allowing girls and boys as well, and they do continue to surprise me, that space to be able to deconstruct concepts or process out loud or learn from each other as well. And there's real power in that dialogue and that listening in that space. And I think for mixed settings, one of the most valuable processes that I love doing within a retreat is small groups and having small group leaders. And however that sort of looks in your context, for me, I've done a range of things, whether it's bringing back old scholars to run small groups, or if it's a younger sort of age group, bringing in sort of student leaders or your social justice group to work with the young age group as well. And the power for both girls and boys to have that role model there with them, and how wonderful that can sort of be when they have their conversation reciprocated, or they get to continue to see the small group leader around school or at different events, and showing that there is a pathway to leadership, and that's something that they can do as well. The power and the possibility there is really amazing too.
Thank you. And is there anything else you wanted to add on that in terms of retreats for the work with girls? Or I noticed you nodding.
Well, I was just nodding at the idea of peer ministry, because we use that a lot, and we have a couple of retreats where boys really share quite deep stories of their own struggles that they've had when they were the age of the boys who are on retreat, and that is very powerful, more powerful than anything I could say to the group, because they, as you said, Maddie, they look up to these older students, and also they realise that what they're experiencing is not unusual as well, because someone, that big boy who I really admire, went through that when he was my age. So that's a very powerful tool, peer ministry.
Thank you. I wonder if I could ask each of you maybe to just take us through a session that you run on retreats, an example of a session that you run on retreats that you think works really well, and maybe just take us through that session. Whoever wants to go first, but yeah.
Oh. Well, do you want me to go first, Maddie?
Or I could give you
Yeah,
some
go
time to
for it.
think about it if you'd like. I could, yep, go for it.
Well, I suppose the power of the paradigm is in the retreats that I offer, in that they've grown to know what to expect. A session that is always a bit of a hit, is one of a better way, is introducing them to spiritual conversation, because they've never experienced the opportunity to speak without being interrupted or corrected or laughed at or whatever. And this whole idea of being put on sacred ground and being able to share something that's come up for them without all those other interruptions or whatever is very powerful. and also a great tool for life. Like, I like to build in tools. I say this, the tool in this retreat is that you've learned to discern, or whatever it might be. And you know, that whole gift of listening to someone, you don't have to agree, you don't have to understand, but just listen and respect and hold that in confidence, you know, in the retreat space. So I suppose that's one thing that I find, it's so counter cultural these days.
But also becoming much more common in the church, which has been fantastic
right.
as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks. And Maddie?
Yeah, so I can sort of, I'm thinking in age groups here, just to sort of break it down and simplify it, but for the both primary and sort of senior schools, anything tactile with food, and breaking it down and recontextualizing sort of a theme or a concept works so well. Amazingly, in terms of primary school, one of the most talked about sessions that I've ever sort of had on a primary school retreat was making the best ice cream sundae possible, and the kids loved that. But we were talking about all the different elements that you could add together, and there were values and qualities about being a kind person in the eyes of God, and how they're all great on their own, but when you add them all together, they can create this super delicious ice cream sundae. And so they loved that, and we got teachers involved and some students involved as well, and that was a really big hit. And then on sort of the flip side, in the senior school, again, anything that's sort of recontextualized with really common everyday items is really powerful as well, because it takes it beyond the retreat as well. And then there's a memory attached to something that they've seen and witnessed and learnt, and that's something that they'll think about going forward as well. And so one thing that I remember really, really strongly is this concept of Christian leadership that we unpacked with some senior school students. And it was talking about how to be a good leader is seeing through sort of the messiness and the chaos and the challenges and the barriers that are placed on people. And being a leader is truly discovering the true value that's sometimes hidden underneath the external and the exterior. And you've really got to get to know people, because their value never changes as a person. And how that was done was with $100 note, and adding in all these disgusting sort of outdated, like stale chips, off tuna, curdled milk into a bowl, and just continuing to add all these really gross things, and inviting students to come and add these really gross sort of food items, but really honing in on, it doesn't matter, it's still $100, and regardless of what's been chucked on top of it into this bowl, you'd still want that $100. And so that was a really powerful sort of session as well.
Again, sounds like some good fun ideas in there too. So fun is obviously a good element of a retreat. I might just give you a couple minutes to break, and I might just turn it over to Laura for a moment. Laura's our assistant editor for education and looks after our education hub. Laura, do you want to just take through and give everyone else a bit of a break, but just take us through the retreat guides that we have on the Australian Catholics Education Hub, just in case people aren't familiar with those.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, Mick. I'm just going to share my screen. Yep. Hopefully it's going to work.
But if I need, let me know if that doesn't work, because I've pinned
let's have a look.
people. I can take people
Cool.
off. No, good.
Okay. So can everybody see
Yep.
the Education Hub? So if you have a look at our Education Hub, there's these lovely little menus up the top here, and you may notice that they change in the next few weeks, but everything will be the same inside the menus, even if they have different names or in a different space. But we have these wonderful resources, this list of resources here, and in that list of resources is our retreat guides that you can see there. And we're adding to these all the time. So these are the 4 that we have here at the moment, but this will grow into the future. So the first one you can see is our AC Plus resources for relationships retreats and formation days. So, you know, if you're looking at helping your students bond or build cohesion as a group, this is what we've got on offer at the moment. So this guide offers some ideas on how our resources might be used on retreat and formation days, exploring relationships. So you may have noticed while everybody's been discussing retreats, I've been putting relevant articles up in the chat box. I hope you all don't mind, that relate to what they've been speaking about, because we've got lots of different things that you can use to support you on your retreat journey. So, so you know, we have a session here that is all about family relationships. And underneath, you know, so we've got an introduction, some input for reflection, an activity, quiet reflection time, small group sharing. So you've noticed that we've talked about that so far, small groups and quiet reflection. We've got lots of resources on prayer too, and probably some more coming up in an AC Plus guide in turn 4. And then we've got some of our articles that will also help with this topic. So we do a Gaming the Gospels section. So if you want to do some fun activities in your retreats, check out our Gaming the Gospels. In this case, we've suggested that Mary and Martha, the 2 sisters, might be good for reflecting on family. The Gospel according to Star Wars. Now there's a family with a story. And of course, then you've got a pop cultural buy-in for the kids. When family drama gets biblical, reminding students to look back to the Bible for inspiration, but in a fun way, and a paraliturgy, family life in all its diversity. So we've got a similar sort of structure for friendships. You can see here there's a reflective activity. So reflection's a big part of effective teaching and getting students to retain things, but also a very, very strong part of the Ignatian examen. And we've been talking about Ignatian spirituality so far, and then healthy relationships. You know, in primary school, we're often talking about friendships and how to relate to each other. In high school, we might be talking about beyond friendships and relationships and things like that. So how do we treat each other with respect? How do we treat each other in a Christian way? We've got some really good ideas there. And again, linked to some activities. So the other resources that we have available at the moment are we've got resources for leadership and formation. We've got social justice retreats, and we've got spirituality. So, you know, just as I was sitting there, I was thinking, oh yeah, kids love action. Maybe I'll do one on eco-spirituality. You know, so you know, you name it, you can do a retreat day on it. And if anyone has any ideas for retreat guides that they would like us to work on, definitely pop them in the chat box. So and keep an eye on your AC Plus emails, because any new ones that come out will be spruiked in there. And make sure that you have signed up for my e-newsletter. So if you're not signed up for Catholic Teacher, jump up the top there to where it says e-newsletter, sign up, and you'll also see other resources we have weekly. So the other thing that I do each week is I will write teachers' notes to support the resources that we have. And what I often do as part of those teaching notes, it doesn't want to click on it, does it? No, my internet's slow, I apologize, but I often add in prayer and reflection. So there's definitely at the end of a lot of these, there are examples of activities. So look in the teacher's notes as well, because there will most definitely be prayers or quite often I do Bible passages as well. So this one's got Bible passages in it, but I was looking for a little reflection thing at the end. Here's one I've done. If you need a positive role model to look up to, where can you find one? How can you judge whether their example is worth following? Do you have to be exactly like them? Write an essay on your role model and why they're an example. Now, sorry, I've picked one that says essay, but I was really hoping to find one. Write a letter to your role model, or write a letter to a friend saying why they're your role model. Write an advice column for teenagers explaining why sometimes we must go our own way or follow our own path. Refer to the example of Jesus and the saints. You can use those sorts of things for reflection questions as well. Sometimes I spell it out a bit more than this one I've fallen on. Is there anything else you think we should cover with that, Mick?
No, thank you, Laura. That was good. Hopefully, it's been helpful. Again, and as we continue, if anyone has any specific questions for us before, we've got about 15 minutes left. So if you want to get it in now. But first, I might go to my next question, which is one of the. I remember when I was doing a retreat once, and I won't name the school, but I was brought in as a young adult guest leader to help lead small groups. And I remember I was in this small group, and it was, I think probably they put me with all the worst kids in the year level, and I don't know why this young 20-something was put in there, but anyway, and these students just wouldn't reflect, wouldn't kind of engage, to the point that when someone was sharing something, you'd have them kind of whispering and giggling about it in the background, and yeah, I had to lay down the law and everything like that with this group as a young 20-something guy, and anyway, but it was. How do you deal with challenging students in retreat situations? What are some of your strategies for dealing with that and trying to make sure it's the most helpful and productive session for everyone involved?
Well, I'll go first. I sort of set the scene at the beginning of every retreat and ask them to come with an open heart, and that it might be something that they're unfamiliar with. But the other thing that works with boys is I call them on love. I say to a boy, I know you love your mates, don't you? And he'll always say yes. And I say, well, you're withholding love from your mates by not allowing them to take part in this exercise or this retreat because of your behaviour. And I don't know why, but they always say, yeah, I get it. And I know that sounds like a furphy, but it works for boys. I don't know about girls. I don't know if that would work with girls.
Thanks, Sam. Maddie?
Yeah, I think it's an age-old question, and I think you're always going to get it as well. And so for me, I think of there's sort of, again, two prongs to this. Depending on who you are and your role on the day, there needs to be really clear roles of there's a retreat facilitator, and there's small group leaders, and then maybe there's staff that pull up on behaviour as well. I find if you have sort of a leadership staff setting the scene at the start of the day, and then all the retreat facilitation, that puts in some really clear boundaries and parameters. And I've been both in a situation where that has happened and it works brilliantly, and then in the situation where that hasn't happened and it has been just pandemonium. And so it's really important that you have those roles really clear, and the understanding as well that your small group leaders aren't there for behavior too. They're there to journey with you on the day as well. And so I think acknowledging that for the young people as well, that they are volunteers, they're giving up their time and they're here to be with you. So let's have that respect and consideration for everyone involved in putting on this sort of day for you, this encounter. So there's that component. And I think as well, understanding that if kids are being challenging or young people are being challenging, maybe it's because they're uncomfortable, awkward, or bored. So are we meeting them where they are as well? And can we adapt to, do we have to take a small group out onto a basketball court and like have a casual conversation while shooting hoops? Do we have to, work the environment to suit them and suit their needs as well? Or is there an opportunity for leadership and empowerment in this as well? And can we give them a role? Can they support us? Can they help us? I find that that's really powerful as well, allowing them to grow into a space too is something that's really effective as well. So I think just in general, the more you try to push someone in line, the more they're going to push back. So I think that understanding and then that adaptability, obviously within reason as well. We all have expectations of young people as we would with staff, and so there's that consideration as well.
Thanks, Maddie. It's interesting. What worked in the example I was talking about was laying down the law. When I said I was laying down the law, I basically said it out to them. And again, maybe I could do this as an outsider. This is a special thing that you never get anywhere else. And they were all senior students. I said, when you leave school, you're not going to have an experience in your life where you're going to be able to just sit around and talk about meaning with a group of people and actually get to some of this deeper stuff. It just doesn't happen. And you can either waste the opportunity or you can actually just try and have the opportunity now, because it's never going to happen for you again. Most likely, unless you're in a certain kind of world, this just doesn't happen in the wider world. And that actually got them back in. And one of the most disruptive kid ended up coming up to me afterwards and really thanking me really strongly for the opportunity. And so, again, sometimes just laying it out as well, that this is something special and you can choose to do it or not, but you're going to miss out if you don't, is also quite helpful anyway for this group of boys. A few questions on our thing, which I think we may struggle to get through, but let's try. Well, first one from Jared Atkinson. What sort of practical suggestions would you have for running retreats with large cohorts? So groups of, say, 250 students, breaking them into smaller cohorts is one suggestion, but not always achievable, with this idea around introductions in school context and stuff. So obviously the environment of the school doesn't always let that happen. What would you do if you've got a big group of, say, 250 students, if you're trying to do a retreat?
Yeah, that's hard. We have 250 per year level, and we all in the year 12 retreats, they all go off at the same time. So they go to 10 different venues off-site, and it's early in the year before the SACs and everything start getting serious. And we've got, rolling bookings. They're very expensive, these places, I know. And in terms of delivering the same material, so there's 250 kids, 25 in each. We have 10 houses. The heads of house give the retreats basically. So there's 10 different flavours, I suppose. But the key concept around the retreat is discernment. We think that's a good time to be thinking about or teaching them a little bit more about how to discern, given that they're about to go out of the bubble. And but that's, it's a very tricky one. And I know that finding the venue is number one difficulty. I don't know if that's helpful, Jared.
Maddie, have you done anything with big groups that size?
Yeah, that's probably been where I've done a majority of my work, and I completely understand the interruption in the school context, and I'm a bit of a problem solver in that. And so what I did at my last school was I set up a old scholars network, and so every sort of year 12 or year 9 or whatever cohort that left and graduated school, I got them to complete a survey and ask if they'd like an opportunity to come back and volunteer and lead. And by doing that, we built up a network of about 200 young people that were willing to come back and be involved in events like this, because they'd had the same experience themselves and they know how important it was, and they wanted to come back and continue being involved in that. If potentially that's not an option, is there a local school nearby with school leaders, a social justice group? Is there a university nearby that has some education students that would love to be involved in an opportunity like this? So for me, I'm all about collaboration as well, and if that can lessen the impact but also give experience to young people who are post-school and want to engage in opportunities like this, and it'll look super good on their resume. And more often than not, if you say morning tea, lunch, and we'll give you a letter saying you've done a fantastic job and you can add that to your resume, you will have young people in a heartbeat. Because what I found post-school is a lot of young people are searching for that purpose and that meaning and the why. And a lot of them, particularly in Catholic education, have had an experience of a retreat where they've been profoundly impacted and wanting to give back and replicate that for the younger generation is something that they love. So again, I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's where my mind goes.
Thanks both. Question here around finding suitable venues or guests when access is limited. So if you're in a small rural town and things like that, any suggestions or ideas for doing things in those contexts?
One of the things that we do, we use the opportunity, say when all the 12s are doing a GAT, to engage another year level, might be the 11s or the 10s, in something. So, and so that might be on site, or it might be, in a room at the local library. So again, they're in house areas, house groups. So there's about 25 in each, and we have a tutor system as well. So the tutors are involved. The tutors might take them for lunch, and you just have it's not really a retreat as such, but we might call it a colloquium, for instance, where it's just about conversation and off campus, or so that sort of thing might work while one whole level is engaged at something. Another level can disperse across the campus, or while people are at at camp, for instance, others can be doing that. Not sure if that helps.
Thanks, Anne. Another quick question, a couple of other quick questions, because I know we've got about a minute or two left, but any advice for working with senior students who's secular and deny having a spiritual side to themselves? Just a short, easy one.
Well, look, I come back to it's relational, and I'm lucky in that because I've taught across several levels. I'm often meeting these students for the second or third time, and so I can, they expect me to know how they're feeling, which it's an insight into how they think they're drawing on our relationship, and I think that's lovely. And I'm ahead of the game, I suppose, in that regard, because I already know them, and I really acknowledge, yes, that the God stuff is difficult. A lot of our language is very accessible, so we might call instead of saying the Holy Spirit, we might say the Spirit of inclusion or the Spirit of hope or whatever. So maybe that's something to look at the language and make it more inclusive.
Thanks, Anne. Maddie, do you have anything on that? before we finish?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is, regardless of what you hope the outcome will be for young people, the understanding that all of these experiences and these encounters are an invitation, not an indoctrination. So we're never going to convert, evangelize, everyone that we encounter, but you would be surprised to know the impact that you're having on young people just by being welcoming and inclusive and safe. And those young people that deny having that spiritual side, acknowledging that and saying, cool, absolutely. That's, we're not here to judge or pass judgment on young people as well. And you'll find by that acceptance or having that acceptance and young people seeing that will break down more walls and barriers that they will have for their own reasons, for their own worldview. And so, yeah, I think that understanding, and again, that sitting with young people is really important. And you'll be surprised, some of the young people that I was like, I will never see you again at something like this, and this is not your scene, and that's absolutely fine. You're still going to do some amazing good in the world through your social action, through your career. They've been some of the first ones to come back on a retreat for year 12s. It's, these young people, our young people will continue to surprise and inspire and teach us so many things. So I think that grace in accepting that's where they are right now, and we will meet them where they are. And it'll still be an invitation, will be something that is so valuable.
Thanks so much, Maddie. We might finish things there because we're conscious of time. Just turn it over to Michelle to just do a quick thank you, but thank you from me for both of you. That was a fantastic session.
Yes, and also from us, thank you very much for providing your time. And Maddie and Mick, just to let you know that the video will be available in coming days. You're more than welcome to share it with the other staff at your school. Those who from Victorian Diocese who have registered for accreditation will upload the attendance.